Hi, everyone. I'm back with chapter 2 of Little Faith by Nickolas Butler. Chapter 2 starts on page 11, so I'm going to give you a couple of seconds to turn to that page. The truck eased off the knob of a hill where the cemetery sat, surrounded by its pickets of white pines and arborvitae, and in every direction the manifold fields of future corn or beans, the occasional red barn, patches of forest, and a half-mile off the proud steeple of St. Olaf's Church, the place of Lyle's baptism, first communion, wedding, and somewhere down the line, he knew, his funeral. Farther west ran the Mississippi River, rolling its slow, swirling way just a bit faster than Lyle's after-supper stroll. Hoot lived not far from Lyle in a smallish ranch-style house on the edge of town. Hoot's home was otherwise immaculately kept, but was dense with the smell of cigarette smoke. Older than Lyle by a few years and long since retired, he spent his days perusing the newspaper's grocery store circulars, scissoring out coupons, and later strolling the aisles of the big city grocers, in La Crosse mostly, or maybe up to Eau Claire, for deals, or perhaps, more accurately, savings. His nights were rote, about 20 happy stories to the refrigerator for a cold can of old Milwaukee, maybe a T-bone or pork chop to flip in the cast iron skillet, and burning his way through a pack or two of Camels before retiring to his bed, where he slept fitfully, rising frequently to evacuate all the evening's beer. Aside from Peg and perhaps Pastor Charlie, Hoot was Lyle's best friend. They were different in any number of ways, but they were both kind, and of course, kindness is a great measure of one's ability to befriend and perhaps love other people. Lyle parked in Hoot's driveway and scooching across the bench seat, Isaac followed him out of the truck, racing ahead of his grandfather to poke at the doorbell, a little pale yellow glowing O. Well, who the hell we got here? Hoot croaked out in his deep, sticky voice as he opened the door. Oh, you two troublemakers. Come on, fellas. Come on in here. Lyle shook his head. We won't keep you too long, he said, then quieter. Just wanted to swing by and hear about those test results. Well, I'm still alive, so I've got that going for me. He rapped a set of knuckles against his skull. Knock wood. Peg wanted me to check in, see if you need anything. Right now, all I need is another cold beer, Hoot said. You may as well have one too. There are many different kinds of alcoholics in the world, and Hoot belonged to that class of drinkers reliant almost exclusively on cheap domestic canned beer. He was not a fall down drunk, never passed out, became belligerent, mean, or even goofy. Hoot just liked to surf the humble tube of a beer buzz, coasting along with just enough magic in his bloodstream to soften the edge of things a little bit. It was many years since he'd divorced, and the cigarettes and beer, the smoke and wet, cheerful bubbles were his own best company as he sat in the kitchen listening to a baseball, football, or basketball game through the fuzz of his old radio. He was gentle and lonesome, even shy. Lyle could not count the number of nights Peg had invited him over to their house for dinner, and how, without fail, Hoot politely refused. We're having pork chops, Peg would say. Are you sure you won't stay? We've got plenty. We even have some of that beer you like in the fridge. Lyle nodded, took note of the half or dozen or so empty cans neatly lined up beside Hoot's sink, smiled. That sounds about right, he said. Thanks, Hoot. And how about you, young man? Can I get you a glass of water, milk, a Coke? I probably got a can of Coke kicking around somewhere. Grandpa said you had some ice cream, said Isaac. He did now, did he? Yes, sir. You thirsty too? The kid's always thirsty, Lyle remarked, and it was true. Shiloh can't pump enough water and food into him. Isaac took a seat at the small circular kitchen table and carefully explored the contours and ridges of the heavy glass ashtray marking its center. Self-conscious about the smell of his house, Hoot repainted the place every single spring. Lyle knew, throwing open the windows to roll thick coats of white over all the yellow-tinged walls and ceilings. He'd once shown Lyle a bathroom in the basement with a crucifix hanging above the toilet. Hoot took the crucifix down off the wall, and there, left in faded white against a backdrop of yellowy brown, was the foggy image of the cross, left over. Hoot joked that his house was held together as much by nicotine residue as by wood or nails. Lyle wondered about Hoot's beleaguered lungs, and a recent trip to the doctor's office, which was about as out of character for Hoot as going for a brisk 7-mile jog or bragging about a new pink yoga mat. Well, he's working hard, aren't you, Isaac? Said Hoot. placing a small glass of water beside the boy's wrists. Now Hoot scratched at his immaculately combed hair, still very dark after all the years. Ice cream, you say? Isaac shrugged. That's what Grandpa told me. Well, you can't listen to everything your old grandpa tells you, don't you? The boy wriggled on his wooden seat, smiled, unsure how to answer. Lyle took a chair beside him. It is a remarkable thing, watching children develop their own sense of humor, that radar that allows us to laugh at our world, our shortcomings, disappointments, even horrors. Huh, Hoot said. Now I'm going to have to rummage around in this icebox for a second or two. Don't mind me. Ice cream, eh? Icebox, Isaac whispered to Lyle. Aha, here we are. Now we're in business, Hoot said. Neapolitan. I like it because a person gets three flavors in one. You ever have this stuff? I'm also partial to spumoni, high-end Italian type ice creams. Isaac peered at Lyle, any doubt well eclipsed by curiosity. Well, it's a goddamn miracle. Three separate ice creams in one container, like the Holy Trinity, I'd say. And better than sherbet, for Christ's sakes. Just a bunch of frozen fruit juice. He ran an old scooper under the kitchen tap, then dug out two rough orbs of tricolored ice cream and placed them in a dish with a spoon before Isaac. The little boy began eating, nodding his head in approval. Satisfied, Hoot took two old Milwaukees from the refrigerator and passed one to Lyle. They cracked open their cans, raising them up to each other. Mud in your eye, Hoot said. Skull, Lyle nodded. They drank. Well, now, Hoot said, you two were out to the cemetery, were you? If you've lost your spot, we're now on page 16. Lyle took a sip of his beer, nodded. Yep, I had a pretty good helper with me. They regarded the boy eating his ice cream. How's it looking out there? Pretty much the same, Lyle said. In his mind's eye, he could see the tall trees of today as they had been 30 years earlier, so much shorter and skinnier. He reckoned many of those trees were about the same age as Peter would have been. In Lyle's youth, much of the land surrounding the cemetery had been uncultivated. Old stands of white pine or oak, walnut or hickory, elm, or even pockets of wild apple. He remembered days not so far off, it sometimes seemed, when there were fewer headstones, when Cemetery Road was not yet paved, when the tractors in the fields were smaller and certainly slower. But that was not what Hoot was asking about. Say, Hoot said to the boy, you want another scoop? I have to ask your grandpa a question out in the garage. You suppose that would be okay if I borrowed him a sec? He was already standing to refill the boy's dish. His mother will kill me, Lyle said. The boy hasn't had supper yet. Come on, Hoot said. It won't hurt him. Isaac grinned, holding out his empty bowl. Lyle threw up his hands. A few moments later, Lyle followed his friend into the garage, where beneath the separate tarpaulins, not one but two Ford Mustangs sat, a 1965 and a 1969, in various states of disrepair. Hoot's smallish pickup truck sat out in the driveway, like a least favored, if most dependable child. You're the only man I know sitting on two vintage Ford Mustangs, neither of them worth a damn, said Lyle. Oh, they're worth something, all right, said Hoot. That's why I had to chop 'em up. When Sheila demanded the divorce, I sure as hell wasn't going to let her have one. Only way I could see to stop her was making him not run. Well, your plan worked, said Lyle. Worked a little too well, I'd say. Lyle rubbed a hand against his jaw, smiled at the cars. And you're not a half-bad mechanic either, Hoot. You should have had these running years ago. What I should have done is dissect them a little more organized like, Hoot said, shaking his head. Hell, I just started selling off parts, hiding parts, throwing parts in the garbage. There was no way I was letting that woman drive off in one of my Mustangs. You ever hear anything from her? Lyle asked, though he was fairly confident he already knew the answer. Nah, that ship sailed a long time ago. I got no quarrel with her now. If she's happy, I'm happy for her. I can't remember now. Where'd she end up? Key West. Tin's bar down there. Met a nice fellow, I guess. Huh, Lyle grunted. I'd always be afraid I was one hurricane away from sinking into the ocean, like Atlantis. Hoot surveyed his cars in the light of the single bare bulb hanging from the garage ceiling. Mark my words, I'm gonna get around to fixing one of them up, though. You'll see. Hell, we could get them both fixed up, drive around together, maybe start a club. Get us some special silk jackets, scarves, those gloves with the ventilation holes. Drive all the way down to New Orleans along the river road. Drink cold beers, eat fresh jambalaya, look out at the Gulf. No club would have us, Lyle said. That's why we'd start our own, see? Hoot countered, withdrawing a pack of Camels from his breast pocket and lighting one, scratching at his temple and blowing out a jet of smoke. Very exclusive. Lyle flapped up one of the tarps, ran his hand along the Mustang's smooth cherry red hood. Behind him, Hoot coughed. I thought you were going to quit, Lyle said. I did, for a little while. It didn't take, I guess. You ever miss it? Back in his 20s, Lyle had smoked cigarettes on those nights when he was at a tavern and perhaps already in his cups. He could see that younger version of himself in a smoky barroom mirror, a cigarette bobbing between his lips, and he yelled over the barroom din, ordering a beer or standing at the jukebox, nodding his head to the pounding bass of Johnny Cash's Folsom Prison Blues. Or there again on those infrequent nights when he and Hoot would arrive back to work after a long day of delivering and installing appliances. Those nights when they'd sit in the break room with a six-pack of beer and a bag of pistachios or pork rinds and bullshit for an hour or two before bidding each other good night and returning to their respective homes. Lyle was always careful on those nights to either hang his clothes out on the line or quickly throw them into the wash. Peg felt cigarettes were a foolish waste of money and loathed the smell of smoke. No, Lyle said easily. I don't miss it. I guess I don't think much about it. They were silent several moments before Lyle spoke up again. So what did the doctors tell you? Just pneumonia. I'm supposed to stop again. This is the last one, I promise. Christ, I was worried, Lyle. Dodged a real bullet. Just pneumonia, Lyle repeated. Come on, Hoot. You gotta start taking better care of yourself. I know it's a goddamn terrible habit, I do, but geez, buddy. I'm 71 years old, Hoot said. You know how many times I've tried to quit? More than I can count. But I'll tell you what, this time I might be scared straight. You know me. You imagine me going to the doctor, taking myself to the doctor? Truth was, I couldn't breathe. Couldn't catch my damn breath. Felt like a goddamn fish out of water. I swear, this is it, amigo. Last one. Finito. From the kitchen, they heard the boy's voice calling out. Grandpa? Hold on, kiddo, Lyle said absently. Then, look, you need anything at all, you let us know, Hoot. I can buy you that gum if you want, Nicorette, or the patches. I'll take you to a hypnotist or an acupuncturist, whatever you think might help. Hoot took a final drag from the cigarette, let the smoke pool in his lungs deep and dark, and then exhaled slowly, letting that butt drop to the garage floor, where he stubbed it out with the toe of his off-brand sneaker. No need. I got my marching orders. The doctor even said I could try chewing tobacco if it helped. But it's time. A new leaf. I'm glad, said Lyle, not looking at his friend. We want you around for the long haul. Me too, said Hoot. I ain't never had the life of the rich and famous, but it sure beats a long, boring dirt nap. Anyway, I'm like those batteries, you know, die hard. Or maybe it was Everlast. Nah, I'd rather die hard than be everlasting, I think. Point is, I don't give up. Lyle could not remember having ever touched Hoot, but he did so now, laying a hand on his old friend's shoulder. Just, you heard what I said, right? You need anything? You won't be too stubborn to ask now, all right? Hoot stared at the garage floor, a small splotch of oil. Let's go in and check on that boy, he said. They found Isaac at the kitchen table, holding his ice cream bowl up so that the melt could run into his open mouth. Both men pulled up chairs and sat beside the boy, simply looking at him. You want a cookie for the road? Hoot asked. The boy nodded his head. Backing out of Hoot's driveway, Lyle glanced at Hoot's house and saw his friend standing at the small kitchen window, coughing into the sink, where he was likely washing the ice cream bowl, warm water running over his hands. All right, that's the end of chapter 2. I'll see you next time for chapter 3.